Andrew George is the man who can read the world's first ever story, the Epic of Gilgamesh. After decades of work, he found a missing text, a discovery that adds a shocking new layer to the tale.
Translation into a modern language was achieved that was reliable. Artists, poets, musicians, dramatists, operettists, librettists have fed on the ancient story of Gilgamesh and turned it into their own property.
This isn't just a poem, it's a 4,000-year-old mystery about a hybrid god-king. We're diving into the details George uncovered, and the crazy part is these new lines add fuel to some of the wildest theories about our ancient past. This story involves genetic engineering, beings from the sky, and a global cataclysm. You won't believe what's been hiding in plain sight. A flood. Before the flood. What most people don't realize is that our oldest story was lost for a reason. It wasn't just forgotten, it was buried. It lay silent for thousands of years, shattered into tens of thousands of pieces, hidden under the dust of a fallen empire. The story of its discovery is almost as epic as the story itself. It all starts not with a hero, but with a king who was obsessed with collecting. His name was Ashurbanipal. He was the last great ruler of the Assyrian Empire, reigning in the 7th century BC. And get this, he wasn't just a warlord, he was a scholar. He was one of the only kings of that time who could actually read and write. So, here's the deal. Ashurbanipal was obsessed with one thing, building a library. Not just a room with a few scrolls, but a massive collection of all the knowledge in the world. He sent his scribes all over Mesopotamia, his vast empire, with a single order. Find every text. Find the magic spells, the medical books, the history, the science, and especially the old sacred stories. They brought back tens of thousands of clay tablets and carefully copied them. This library in his capital city of Nineveh was the first truly great library in history. And then it was all lost. Nineveh was destroyed, burned to the ground. The palace collapsed, and the king's entire collection of world knowledge was smashed and buried. And that's putting it lightly. For 2,500 years, it all just sat there, waiting. Fast forward to the mid-1800s. Archaeologists are digging in what is now modern-day Iraq. A British man named Austin Henry Layard and his assistant Hormuzd Rassam are digging at the mound of Kuyunjik, the ruins of Nineveh. They unearth the palace, and inside they find the remains of the library. Not a clean room of shelves, but a tablet room filled with over 30,000 broken clay fragments. It was a disaster. It was the world's biggest, oldest, and most important jigsaw puzzle. These fragments were packed into crates and shipped to the British Museum in London. And for years, they just sat in the basement. They were a jumbled mess, and only a handful of people on Earth could even try to read the cuneiform, the wedge-shaped writing. But here's the catch. One of those people was a man named George Smith. Smith was brilliant. He was a self-taught genius who had been obsessed with these tablets since he was a teenager. He wasn't a rich explorer. He was an engraver who studied on his lunch breaks. The museum eventually hired him to help sort the massive pile. In 1872, Smith was sifting through the fragments from Ashurbanipal's library. He picked up a piece. He started to translate. His eyes got wider. He read it again. The tablet told the story of a great boat built to save a man, his family, and animals from a massive God-sent flood. It described the boat landing on a mountain and the man sending out a dove to find dry land. Smith, a good Victorian man, realized what he was holding. It was the story of Noah's Ark. But it wasn't from the Bible. It was written in cuneiform centuries before the Hebrew text was ever written down. The story goes that Smith was so stunned he stood up and, to the shock of his colleagues, began to remove his own clothing. He was in a state of pure eureka. He had found it. He had found the story of the Great Flood written by a pagan civilization. This one tablet broke history. It proved that this foundational story was part of a much older shared human memory. And get this, the tablet itself said it was just one part of a much bigger story. It was Tablet 11 of a grander epic, the epic of a king named Gilgamesh. The world had just rediscovered its first hero, but the puzzle was far from complete. Smith had found the most dramatic chapter, but the rest of the story was still shattered. Humbaba's secret identity. George Smith had opened the door, but what he had opened was a mystery with thousands of missing pieces. After his shocking discovery, he actually went back to Nineveh himself, and in an almost unbelievable twist of fate, digging in the dirt, he found another fragment that contained the missing lines of the flood story. He found the needle in the world's biggest haystack. But Smith passed away young, and the full story of Gilgamesh remained a jumbled mess. For the next 100 years, scholars tried to piece it together. They found other, older versions. They figured out the story had evolved, starting as 5 separate Sumerian poems, then becoming a unified Babylonian epic around 1800 BC, and finally being edited into the classic 12-tablet version by a master editor named Sinleki Onanai around 1100 BC. This was the version King Ashurbanipal had in his library, but it was still full of holes. There were huge gaps where the clay was smashed to powder. We knew the outline of the story, but the details, the emotions, the real wow factors were missing. And this is where Andrew George comes in. George, a British Assyriologist, is the George Smith of our time. He's the man who has dedicated his entire life to this one single text. He's the detective who went back to all the museum basements in London, in Berlin, in Baghdad, in Philadelphia, and re-examined every single fragment. He did what Kramer did for Sumerian literature, but just for Gilgamesh. So, here's the deal. Andrew George spent decades hunting. He would find a tiny piece, the size of a postage stamp, and like a cuneiform reading superhero, he'd recognize the scribe's handwriting and say, this goes in Tablet 5. This is the part where they are in the forest. His translation, which came out in the late 90s, became the new standard. It was the most complete Gilgamesh ever assembled, but the story doesn't end there. This is where the title of this video comes to life. I found a missing texts. In 2011, George was working with a curator in Iraq looking at a collection of tablets that had been, let's say, unofficially excavated. A private collector had them. George took one look at a tablet and nearly fell over. It was a new piece of Tablet 5. The part of the story describing the cedar forest. And it wasn't just a few new words, it was 20 brand new lines that had been missing for 3,000 years. And what they said changed everything. Before this discovery, the cedar forest of Humbaba was always described as this quiet, spooky, dark place. But these new lines, they blew that idea out of the water. The new text describes the forest as a vibrant, noisy jungle. It talks about the din of the forest, with cicadas, birds, and monkeys shrieking and calling. It was a rich, tropical, and alive place, a paradise guarded by the monster Humbaba. And it gave new details about Humbaba himself. It describes him as a kind of king of the forest with the animals as his musicians. This one missing text changed the entire feel of the epic's central adventure, but it also added fuel to some of the wildest theories out there. Yeah, about that. For years, fringe theorists have asked, what was Humbaba? The epic describes him as a terrifying creature with a face made of coiled intestines. His aura, or radiance, is so powerful it paralyzes people. He has 7 of them. Gilgamesh and Enkidu have to defeat all 7 auras before they can even get to him. The text says his voice is the deluge, a flood. His breath is fire and his roar is a storm. Mainstream scholars say this is just poetic language for a scary monster, a personification of a volcano or an earthquake. But the wild theories, they say Humbaba wasn't a monster. He was a machine, an ancient advanced technology guardian. The cedar forest? Maybe it wasn't a forest at all, but a forbidden zone. A mining operation, a spaceport for the gods. And Humbaba's 7 auras? A 7-layered security system. His fiery breath and flood-like voice? A high-tech weapon system. The missing text Andrew George found, describing the forest as also being full of monkeys and birds, just makes it weirder. Was it a biodome? Was it an advanced AI protecting a garden? The new lines didn't solve the mystery, they made it deeper, and Humbaba is just one piece of the puzzle. The hero who hunted him is even stranger. Gilgamesh himself was not fully human, and the epic makes that very, very clear. The first super soldier. So here's the deal. The story is called the Epic of Gilgamesh. But who was he? The very first lines of the epic on Tablet 1 tell us everything we need to know, and it's a wow factor that most people just read right past. The text states, clear as day, Gilgamesh was 2/3 divine, 1/3 human. Let's just pause on that. 2/3, not half god, half man like a Greek hero. 2/3. How does that even work? What does that mean? Andrew George, the careful scholar, translates this and says it's the ancient way of expressing that Gilgamesh was mostly divine. He was a king, and kings were seen as shepherds for the gods, so they bigged him up. But the wild theories, they hear 2/3 divine and they see a formula, a genetic equation. This is where the story of Gilgamesh crashes right into the story of the Anunnaki, the gods of the Sumerians and Babylonians, the ones who supposedly came from the sky. What if the Anunnaki were a real, physical, advanced race? And what if Gilgamesh was their experiment? A hybrid designed to rule over the primitive worker humans. Maybe 2/3 was the specific genetic mix they needed to create a ruler who was strong and smart like them, but could still live on Earth and manage the flocks of humanity. This one line changes how you read the whole story. Gilgamesh isn't just an arrogant king, he's a biological hybrid who doesn't fit in anywhere. The epic says he was a terror. He was so powerful, so arrogant that he abused his people. The text says he was a wild bull and that his lust leaves no virgin to her lover. He was out of control. His human subjects in his city of Uruk cried out to the gods. They said, "You made this guy. You have to do something." And the god's solution is the next wild theory, wow factor. They don't smite Gilgamesh, they decide to fight fire with fire, or more accurately, to fight one experiment with another. This is where Enkidu comes from. The gods get the mother goddess, Aruru, and they have her create a match for Gilgamesh. A second self. She takes clay, pinches it off, and creates Enkidu, the wild man. And get this, Enkidu is all wild. He's covered in hair, lives with the animals, and eats grass. He's the total opposite of the civilized Gilgamesh. So what's that about? Was Enkidu a primitive human, an early model brought up to speed, or was he a different kind of hybrid? An experiment in balance, all nature to balance Gilgamesh's all power. The story of how Enkidu is tamed is, well, it's not monetization friendly. Let's just say the temple sent a woman, Shamhat, to spend 7 days with him. After their intimate time, the animals turned from him. He had become human. He had gained wisdom. He was brought to the city of Uruk, and that's when he finally meets Gilgamesh. They immediately fight. The text describes a massive, building-shaking wrestling match. They grappled like bulls, shattering doorposts. But here's the catch. Neither one can win. They are perfectly matched. And in that moment of stalemate, they stop, look at each other, and become best friends. Inseparable brothers. This is the real start of the story. The out-of-control hybrid king has just met his equal. The wild theory is that this was the gods' plan all along. They created Enkidu not to remove Gilgamesh, but to distract him, to focus his unnatural energy. And it works. Gilgamesh stops abusing his people and almost immediately says, "I've got a great idea. Let's go on an adventure. Let's go to the cedar forest and take down Humbaba." Enkidu, who knows the forest and is terrified of Humbaba, says, "This is a terrible idea." But Gilgamesh, the 2/3 god, can't be stopped. They go. They face the 7 auras. They confront the guardian, and they end him. They cut down the sacred cedars and float them back to Uruk. They are the greatest heroes in the world, and that's when they make their first big mistake. The goddess Ishtar, the goddess of love and, more importantly, war, sees Gilgamesh all cleaned up and wants him. She proposes to him, and Gilgamesh laughs in her face. He mocks her. He lists all her former lovers and how she ruined them. It was a bad move. Ishtar, furious, goes to her father, Anu, the sky god. She demands he give her the bull of heaven to smite Gilgamesh. The bull of heaven is unleashed, and it's another wow factor creature. Its breath opens up giant pits in the earth that swallow hundreds of people. But Gilgamesh and Enkidu, the hybrid tag team, manage to take it down too. They are unstoppable. They have defeated a god's guardian and a god's monster, and the gods have had enough. They hold a council. They say this has gone too far. One of them must perish. And they decide Enkidu must be the one. not the two-thirds god king who started it all, but his balance wheel friend. This decision, this injustice, is what triggers the most important part of the entire epic. The terror of the king was just beginning. He was about to learn what it really means to be human. The snake and the plant. The story of Gilgamesh isn't really about monsters, it's about what happens after the monster hunting. After defying the gods, Enkidu gets sick. The epic describes his decline over 12 days. It's a slow, agonizing process. Gilgamesh, the all-powerful god king, can do nothing. He watches his best friend, his second self, fade away. When Enkidu finally passes, Gilgamesh is broken. He is consumed by a new emotion. Not rage, not arrogance, but terror. The text describes his grief in heartbreaking detail. He roars like a lioness. He clutched and tore at his hair. For 7 days and 7 nights, he refuses to let Enkidu's body be buried, until a worm fell out of his nose. Only then does he accept that his friend is gone, and in that moment he has a horrifying realization. He looks at himself. He, Gilgamesh, the two-thirds god, is also one-third human, and that one-third part will perish. The epic says, "Despair is in my heart. What my brother is now, that shall I be when I am gone." This is the moment the epic truly begins. The adventure is over. The quest starts. Gilgamesh is no longer hunting for fame. He is hunting for an escape. He is going to find a way to not pass away. And he knows there's one person who might have the answer, a man named Utnapishtim, a name that means he who found life. So here's the deal. Utnapishtim is the only human being ever granted immortality by the gods. He's the man who survived the Great Flood. Gilgamesh, in his grief, puts on animal skins and starts walking. He journeys to the ends of the earth. He crosses a sun-dark tunnel that no man has ever passed through. He comes to the waters of oblivion, and he finally finds Utnapishtim. He looks at this legendary immortal man, and he's just a normal-looking old guy, relaxing. Gilgamesh, ragged and desperate, asks him the big question, how did you do it? How did you join the gods and get eternal life? And this is where Utnapishtim breaks silence. He tells Gilgamesh a story, and it's the same story George Smith found on that first broken tablet. The story of the Great Flood. Utnapishtim says that years ago the gods, led by the god Enlil, decided to wipe out humanity. Why? The texts say humans had become too noisy. They were too numerous, and their din was keeping the gods from sleeping. It's a baffling, petty reason, but one god, Ea, also known as Enki, had a soft spot for humans. He leaked the plan. He went to Utnapishtim's house and whispered to the reed wall. He told him, tear down your house, build a boat, take aboard the seed of all living things. Utnapishtim did it. He built a massive cube-shaped ark. The text gives the exact dimensions. He loaded it with his family, his craftsmen, animals, and all his gold and silver. Then the storm came. For 7 days, a deluge ripped the world apart. The gods themselves were terrified of the storm they had created. The text says they cowered like dogs in the highest heaven. When the storm ended, Utnapishtim's boat was on a mountaintop. He sent out a dove, then a swallow, then a raven. When the raven didn't come back, he knew there was dry land. He got off the boat and made a sacrifice. The gods, smelling the sweet savor, gathered like flies. Enlil, the god who started the flood, was furious. He saw the boat and was enraged. But Ea, Enki, calmed him down. He said, how could you do this? From now on, let lions and wolves lessen mankind, but never again do this. Enlil, in a total change of heart, went to Utnapishtim and his wife, touched their foreheads and said, hitherto Utnapishtim has been but human. Henceforth he and his wife shall be like us gods. And that's how he got eternal life. By luck. By being in the right place at the right time and having the right god on his side. This is the wow factor that hits Gilgamesh. There is no secret. There's no how-to guide for immortality. It was a one-time deal. Gilgamesh is crushed. But Utnapishtim, seeing his despair, gives him one last chance. He says, down at the bottom of the ocean there is a plant. It looks like a thistle. It will prick your hands, but if you can get it, it is the plant of rejuvenation. It will not make you live forever, but it will make you young again. Gilgamesh, with his last bit of hope, ties stones to his feet, sinks to the bottom of the ocean, finds the plant and grabs it. He gets back on his boat, triumphant. He has it. He tells his boatman, "I will take this back to my city, Uruk. I will give it to the old men to eat, and then I will eat it myself." He has the secret. And then, the story gives its final, cruelest twist. On the way home, Gilgamesh stops to bathe in a pool of cool water. He leaves the plant on the shore, and a snake, smelling the plant's sweet fragrance, slithers out, eats the plant, and immediately sheds its skin. It becomes young again. Gilgamesh sees this. He sits down, and he weeps. He has failed. He has lost the one thing that could have saved him. He returns to his city, Uruk, with nothing. He has failed. Or has he? The secret to being human. So let's get this straight. Gilgamesh, the king who was 2/3 God, comes dragging himself back to his city, Uruk. He has absolutely nothing to show for his journey. No eternal life. No magic, youth-restoring plant. He's crossed the waters of death, found the one immortal man on earth, and failed every single test. His quest was, by every measure, a total, humiliating failure. His best friend Enkidu is dead and gone. He is empty-handed, and this right here is the real hidden knowledge of the entire epic. This is the missing text that the great scholar Andrew George, after his lifetime of work, finally breaks silence about. Think about it. People watching this, people digging into this story, are looking for a mystery. They're wondering if this all happened overnight, if the wild theories about ancient aliens and lost technology are true, if we're all missing one key detail that unlocks the whole thing. And the thing is, we are missing the key detail. We're so obsessed with the 2/3 God part, the bull of heaven, and the monstrous Humbaba that we miss the entire point. The end of the epic is, without a doubt, the most important part. Gilgamesh, covered in filth, empty-handed, and spiritually exhausted, stands with his boatman, Urshanabi. This is the man who ferried him across the waters of death, the man he's about to banish. He stands with this boatman and he just looks at his city. Uruk, the city he ruled like a tyrant, the city he abandoned. And he says, "Ye, go up, Urshanabi, walk on the walls of Uruk, study the foundation terrace and examine the brickwork. See if its bricks are not baked brick and if the 7 sages did not lay its foundations." He's not just looking at a wall. This isn't just sightseeing, this is the click. This is the moment of genuine, world-shattering understanding. He's realizing that his real immortality, the only one that actually matters, isn't in a magic plant at the bottom of the ocean or in becoming a god. It's right here. It's in the city he built. It's in the legacy he will leave behind. It's in the story that will, thousands of years later, be told about him. This is the precise moment the 2/3 God finally and completely becomes 100% human. He accepts his mortality. He accepts that he, Gilgamesh, the great hero, will also perish. And in that acceptance, he finds peace. He finds the real secret to life that Utnapishtim, the lonely, bored, immortal man, could never have. The secret is that life has to end to have meaning. A life that goes on forever is just a prison. A life that ends has a purpose. To build something that lasts. This is what Andrew George, the great scholar from the University of London, talks about. The silence he breaks is the silence of academics who are so busy counting syllables and cataloging tablet fragments that they are afraid to talk about meaning. They're afraid to treat this text like literature, like a message. George insists that this 4,000-year-old story, the oldest in the world, is not just a dusty artifact. It's a message. It's a mirror. The transcript of a talk he gave puts it perfectly. He calls the epic something more like life, untidy, ambiguous. He says it's a mirror reflecting mortality, friendship, and the longing for meaning. The missing text he found, the new fragments that describe the cedar forest, just add to this. They add a crucial layer. The new text describes the forest not as a dark, evil place, but as a vibrant, noisy ecosystem. It was full of monkeys, insects, and birds. It was a noisy forest. Humbaba wasn't just a monster, he was a guardian, put there by the gods, and his voice was the sound of the forest itself. This shows us a real living world that Gilgamesh and Enkidu, in their arrogance and their thirst for fame, destroyed. They ended Humbaba. They cut down the sacred trees. And for what? For fame. to make a name for themselves, and the gods punish them for it. The epic is a story about consequences. It's a story about growing up. Gilgamesh starts as a monster, a tyrant who abuses his people. He ends as a wise king. He learns through the terrible loss of his only friend that his job isn't to be a god. His job is to be a good king for his people. So what about all the wild theories? The Anunnaki, the idea that Humbaba was a machine, the hybrid DNA of Gilgamesh. The thing is, the epic is so old it's possible it's a garbled history. Maybe it is a fragmented memory of a time when gods walked the earth and tinkered with our genetics. Maybe Gilgamesh was a two-thirds hybrid, a demigod with powers we can't understand. But what Andrew George's work reminds us is that it doesn't matter. The real story, the human story, is about what Gilgamesh does with that power. He wastes it. He abuses it. He acts like a spoiled child. And he only becomes a true hero, a true king, when he loses it all and accepts his small, fragile, human place in the world. That's the hidden knowledge Andrew George has pieced together. The oldest story in the world isn't a sci-fi manual. It isn't about how to beat oblivion. It's about how to face it, with courage and by building something that lasts. It's about accepting that you will die and deciding to build a wall, write a story, or raise a family anyway. That is the only immortality we get, and it's the only one worth having. So, is the Epic of Gilgamesh a true, garbled history of alien gods and genetic experiments? Or is it just the most powerful story ever told about being human? Let us know what you think, and don't forget to like and subscribe.